I was going to give my daughter the biggest gift of her life, but on her wedding day, with one sentence, she made sure she'd never receive it. My name is Helen Carter. I'm 72 years old, widowed for nearly 3 decades, and for most of my life, I've been told I'm too much of a giver, that I bend until I break. I always thought it was a compliment, proof that I loved deeply. I raised my daughter Amelia alone after my husband, Mark, passed away. He died of a heart attack when she was 8. I was 39 then, with no college degree, no family inheritance to fall back on. Just a mortgage, a little girl with grief in her eyes, and a stack of bills I wasn't sure how to pay. We lived in a modest house in the quieter part of town, the kind with creaky floors and a porch swing that groaned with every sway. I worked days at the library and evenings cleaning offices. Amelia had what she needed, never everything she wanted, but always enough. And I thought she understood the difference. Amelia was bright, ambitious, and a little particular about appearances, even as a teenager. She'd iron her school blouses the night before and spend too long in front of the mirror, making sure her hair had just the right wave. I'd watch her with a mix of pride and quiet worry, wondering if she'd come to believe that how the world saw her mattered more than who she truly was. There were little moments, even back then, that should have told me something, like the time she was embarrassed when I came to a parent-teacher night straight from my second job, still in my cleaning uniform. She wouldn't look me in the eye when her friends passed us in the hallway. I laughed it off, telling myself it was just teenage nerves. But here's the thing about dismissing small hurts. They grow into bigger ones when you keep ignoring them. Years went by. Amelia graduated, went to college out of state, on scholarships, yes, but also with help from me selling Mark's old watch and my wedding ring to cover what the aid didn't. I never told her about that. I didn't want her to feel guilty. I wanted her to fly. When she moved back to town, she had a degree in marketing and a job at a big firm downtown. She spoke differently, dressed differently, moved differently. She carried herself like someone trying to leave her old life behind. And I began to wonder if that included me. Still, I was proud. I bragged about her to the ladies at church, kept her framed graduation photo on the mantel, and when she introduced me to her fiancé, Daniel, I told myself, this is her new beginning, and I'll be here for her through it all. I didn't notice, not right away, that she'd stopped bringing Daniel by my house, that our dinners became rare and rushed, that when we did meet, she would steer the conversation away from my life and toward hers. I told myself she was busy. I told myself weddings were stressful. And above all, I told myself she was my daughter, my blood. Whatever small slights came, they were just wind over water, nothing deep enough to change the current between us. But deep down, there was a small voice I ignored, a voice that whispered I might be bending too far for someone who had stopped reaching back. That voice would get louder in the months to come, much louder. It started small, so small I almost missed it. A text instead of a call, a sorry I can't make it this weekend, followed by a string of excuses that didn't sound quite real. I told myself Amelia was busy with wedding planning, but even in my most generous moments, I knew it wasn't just that. When she announced her engagement, she did it over the phone. No dinner together, no sharing the story face to face. I remember standing in my kitchen, the smell of stew on the stove, as she rushed through the details. His name's Daniel. He's in finance. We're so happy. I'll send you a picture. I congratulated her, of course. But when the call ended, I realized she hadn't even asked how I was. A week later, she sent me a text about an intimate dinner with his family at a high-end restaurant downtown. "Dress nice, Mum," she added. I laughed to myself. I only had 2 dresses I'd consider nice, both bought years ago for church banquets. I chose the navy one with lace sleeves, the one Mark used to say made my eyes look brighter. When I walked in, Amelia's smile faltered for a second before she smoothed it over. Daniel's parents were there, elegant and reserved. His mother wearing a necklace that probably cost more than my car. Conversation was polite, but thin. Every time I tried to share a story about Amelia's childhood, she'd jump in to change the subject, steering it back to wedding venues and honeymoon plans. Then it happened. Daniel's mother complimented Amelia's dress, and Amelia, without missing a beat, replied, "Oh, she's always had great taste. Definitely didn't get it from me growing up." She chuckled softly, like it was harmless. My cheeks burned. I smiled to keep from showing it hurt. But inside, something shifted. The bridal dress shopping came next. I found out through a Facebook post, a picture of her surrounded by bridesmaids, holding a glass of champagne, the caption reading, "Best day ever with my girls." I tried to tell myself maybe it was spontaneous, maybe they hadn't planned it. But when I asked her about it, she just said, "Oh, Mum, it was such a last-minute thing. You wouldn't have enjoyed it." That stung more than I wanted to admit. One afternoon, I sat at my kitchen table with a cup of tea, going through some paperwork. My will was there, folded neatly in a manila envelope. For years, it had been my quiet plan to leave the house, my savings, and Mark's remaining possessions to Amelia. It wasn't much by some standards, but it was the sum of everything I'd worked for, my gift to her when I was gone. But that day, my pen hovered over the envelope longer than usual. I told myself I'd think about it after the wedding. Surely this distance was just a phase, a byproduct of stress, seating charts, and flower arrangements. Surely my daughter wouldn't truly push me away. Then came the first real crack. At a Sunday lunch with a few of her friends, she introduced me casually as my mum, she's retired now, and quickly moved on to talk about her firm's latest campaign. I sat there, smiling, nodding, pretending I didn't notice that she hadn't mentioned anything about who I really was, what I'd done for her, what we'd been through. That night, I stared at the ceiling in my bedroom, listening to the old house creak. I thought of the nights I'd walked home from the bus stop in the rain, shoes soaked through, just so I could save money for her school trips. The times I'd gone without a winter coat so she could have a new one. All of it. And now I was an afterthought. Still, I stayed quiet, because she was my daughter, my blood. And blood, I told myself again, should be thicker than water. But as the weeks rolled on, the water kept rising. The engagement party was held at one of those rooftop venues downtown, the kind with string lights overhead and champagne flutes that looked too delicate to actually drink from. Amelia had told me, "It's just casual, Mum." But when I stepped out of the elevator, I knew she and I had very different definitions of that word. The place glittered. Women in designer dresses, men in tailored suits, the skyline twinkling behind them like it was part of the decor. I'd chosen my best dress, cream-coloured with a floral print, and paired it with the small gold locket Mark had given me on our 10th anniversary. It was simple, but it meant something. I spotted Amelia across the terrace, laughing with Daniel and his parents. Her eyes landed on me, and for a moment there was a flicker. Surprise? Annoyance? I couldn't tell. She came over, kissed my cheek quickly, and said, "Oh, good. You made it." Her tone was light, but not warm. She took my arm and led me toward a cluster of people. "This is my mum," she said, smiling briefly. She's just my mum. Just my mum. No mention of what I'd done for her. No pride, no warmth. Just a placeholder introduction so she could get on with her conversations. Daniel's mother glanced at my dress, then at Amelia's sequined gown, and smiled politely. "Lovely to meet you," she said, though her eyes had already moved back to the skyline. Amelia excused herself after barely a minute, leaving me standing alone with the clink of glasses and the low hum of conversation filling the air. I tried to make small talk with a couple nearby, but it was clear I was the outsider here. Later, as the photographer moved through the crowd, Amelia waved me over for a few family shots. I stood beside her, smiling, when she leaned in slightly and murmured, Next time, maybe something more classy? It's fine for tonight, though. I froze for half a second, the smile still fixed on my face for the camera. Classy, I repeated quietly, but she was already turning back toward Daniel. I felt the heat rise in my cheeks. I didn't know if it was embarrassment, anger, or both. I spent the rest of the evening on the edge of the crowd, nursing a single glass of water, watching my daughter flit from group to group like a perfect hostess, while I stood there, invisible, unless she needed to tick me off a list of expected appearances. At one point, a woman I didn't know leaned over and said, "You must be so proud of her. She's marrying into such a good family." I swallowed hard. "Yes," I said softly, proud. But inside, something was shifting. A quiet recalibration. On the taxi ride home, the city lights blurred in the window. I thought of my will again. I'd been planning to make it official after the wedding, to give Amelia the security I'd always wanted her to have. But what good was leaving something behind for someone who couldn't even look at me without seeing a flaw to correct? I told myself not to be rash. Maybe she was under pressure. Maybe it was just the crowd, the venue, the nerves. But in the pit of my stomach, I knew this wasn't about one night. It was a pattern. And patterns don't change just because you hope they will. When I got home, I hung up my dress carefully, smoothing out the wrinkles. My locket caught the light as I passed the mirror. I touched it, thinking of Mark. If he'd been alive, I wondered if Amelia would dare speak to me this way in front of him. I doubted it. I went to bed that night with a decision forming in the back of my mind. I wouldn't act on it yet, not until I was certain. But if she humiliated me again, I'd make sure she understood, once and for all, that my love had limits. And I'd make sure she learned it in a way she'd never forget. A week after the engagement party, Amelia called and asked if I could meet her at her apartment. She said she needed to talk about the wedding, which I assumed meant seating arrangements, flowers, or maybe a list of family members she wanted me to invite. Her building was one of those sleek, modern complexes, with a doorman and polished marble floors that smelled faintly of lemon and money. I took the elevator up, my reflection staring back at me from the mirrored walls, and reminded myself not to feel out of place. When she opened the door, she looked polished as always. Hair swept up, makeup perfect, not a wrinkle in sight on her silk blouse. "Come in, Mum," she said, stepping aside. Her voice was pleasant, but carried a certain briskness, like she was checking off a task. We sat in her living room, and she pulled out a notebook. "Okay, so for the ceremony seating, I think it would be better if you sat a few rows back, maybe with some of Dad's old friends from the library. Days. It'll be more comfortable for you there, and it'll keep the immediate family photos looking consistent." I stared at her. "Consistent?" "You know, so everything matches. We're going for a certain aesthetic. It's nothing personal." She smiled, as if that excused it. I nodded slowly, though inside my chest felt tight. "And the reception?" I asked. She hesitated. "Well, I was thinking maybe you could be at a quieter table, away from the dance floor. You're not really a big dancer, and it'll give you a nice place to chat with people you know." I heard the words, but what I felt was the space she was carving between us, not just in seating charts, but in her life. A few minutes later, as she flipped through her notes about music and menu options, she added casually, "Also, during the toasts, maybe you could just keep it short, like a quick, 'Congratulations, I'm so happy for you both.' And that's it. You don't need to say too much." I looked at her for a long moment. "You think I might embarrass you?" She glanced up, startled, then laughed lightly. "Oh, Mom, don't be dramatic. It's just, you have a way of telling long stories, and we don't want to lose the crowd." I nodded again, but something inside me was splintering. Later that night, back at home, I replayed the conversation in my mind while making a cup of tea. I tried to remember the last time she'd asked how I was doing, or if I needed anything. Tried to remember when she'd last thanked me, not just for some small gesture, but for the years of my life I'd given her. The phone rang. It was my friend Marianne checking in. I told her about the seating chart conversation, about the reception table, about the limits on my toast. Marianne was quiet for a moment before she said, "Helen, I've known you for 30 years. If someone can't be proud of you, after everything, you need to stop twisting yourself to fit into their world. That's not love. That's performance." Her words landed like a stone in my stomach. I walked into my bedroom and opened the top drawer of my dresser. There, under a neatly folded scarf, was my will. I pulled it out, running my fingers over the envelope. For decades, Amelia had been its primary beneficiary. My house, my savings, everything Mark and I had built, piece by piece. I didn't make any changes that night, but I left the will out on my desk, where I could see it every day. A silent reminder that love doesn't mean handing over your life's work to someone who treats you like an inconvenience. Still, she was my daughter, and even as that voice in my head grew louder, warning me that this wasn't just stress, that this was who she'd become, I kept hoping I was wrong. But hope can't stop a wave that's already gathering speed. 2 weeks before the wedding, I stopped by the boutique where Amelia worked part-time with a friend. I thought I'd surprise her with lunch, her favourite, chicken salad on rye from the little deli around the corner. The store was quiet when I stepped in, the air smelling faintly of perfume and new fabric. Amelia was in the fitting area with a group of women, laughing as they tried on dresses for what I assumed were bridesmaids. I stood near the racks of scarves, waiting for her to notice me. That's when I heard it. One of the bridesmaids, tall, red hair, sharp voice, asked, "So, is your mom giving a speech at the reception?" Amelia rolled her eyes. "God, I hope not. You know how she is. She'll go on forever about the past, and half of it won't make sense to anyone." I told her to keep it short, but she likes to make things about her. The group laughed. Amelia smiled, clearly unbothered. "Honestly, I just don't want her to embarrass me in front of Daniel's family. They're very refined. I mean, she's sweet, but she's old-fashioned. You get it." Something in my chest turned to stone. I placed the lunch bag on the nearest counter, quietly turned, and walked out. I don't think she even knew I'd been there. By the time I got home, my hands were shaking, not from anger, but from something colder, something final. I'd spent years dismissing these moments, telling myself she didn't mean it, that she was just under stress, that deep down she loved me. But love without respect is just a word you say when it's convenient. That night, I sat at my kitchen table with a pen and my will. I opened the envelope and stared at her name on the page. I didn't cross it out, not yet, but I drew a small star next to it, a mark for me to remember. This was the week I finally saw her clearly. The days leading up to the wedding were strangely quiet between us. Amelia sent the occasional text about arrival times and dress codes, but there were no calls, no invitations to help with final touches. I knew she was spending time with Daniel's family. There were pictures online of them at dinners, wine glasses in hand, smiles all around. I wasn't in any of them. Marianne stopped by for tea one afternoon, and I told her about what I'd overheard. She didn't hide her outrage. "Helen, if she's willing to say those things to her friends, she's saying worse when you're not around. And she's certainly not thinking of you as family in the way you've been thinking of her." I sighed. I keep wondering if maybe I wasn't enough for her, not polished enough. Not— Marianne cut me off. "Don't you dare. You gave her everything. You were enough 100 times over. This isn't about your worth. It's about hers." Her words stayed with me. 2 nights before the wedding, I took out my dress. It was the same one I'd worn to my niece's graduation, deep green, with a soft shimmer in the fabric. I'd bought it years ago, knowing it would last. I laid it across the bed, smoothing the sleeves, and placed the gold locket on top. I stared at it for a long time. That locket had been my talisman through every hardship, a little reminder of Mark's steady love. And I decided, if Amelia humiliated me again, I wouldn't just quietly fade into the background. I'd been silent for too long. I went to bed with a strange calm, not the kind that comes from peace, but the kind that comes when you've made a decision you know you won't turn back from. The wedding day was coming, and so was my moment. The morning of the wedding was bright and unseasonably warm. Sunlight poured through my curtains, landing on the dress I'd laid out the night before. I took my time getting ready, curling my hair softly at the ends, applying a touch of blush, and fastening the gold locket around my neck. I told myself I wasn't dressing for anyone's approval. I was dressing for me. When I arrived at the venue, I could see the cars lined up along the gravel drive, each one sleeker and newer than the last. The place looked like something out of a magazine. White pillars, manicured gardens, and a fountain in the centre with rose petals floating on the surface. A young woman at the entrance checked my name and gave me a polite smile. "Mrs. Carter, you're at table 14. It's just past the dance floor in the far corner." Far corner, of course. I stepped inside, my heels clicking against the polished floor. Everywhere I looked, guests were laughing, hugging, sipping champagne. The air buzzed with a kind of excitement that didn't seem to reach me. When I spotted Amelia in the distance, my breath caught. She was stunning. Her gown fitted perfectly, her hair swept into an elegant chignon. She was surrounded by bridesmaids, all of them glowing. For a moment, my heart swelled with pride. Then she saw me. Her smile froze for a fraction of a second before she walked over, bouquet in hand. "Mom," she said, leaning in for a quick kiss on the cheek. "You look nice." Her eyes flicked down at my dress, then away, as if she were checking it off a list. "I'm glad to be here," I said softly. "Oh, just so you know," she continued, glancing around to make sure no one was listening. "We'll take some photos with you after the ceremony, but Daniel and I also want a few, you know, more formal shots without everyone, just to keep the look consistent." There it was again, that word. Consistent. The ceremony itself was beautiful, I'll give her that. Strings played softly as she walked down the aisle, and Daniel's eyes lit up when he saw her. They exchanged vows, kissed, and the guests erupted into applause. Afterward, the photographer began arranging groups for pictures. I stood with Amelia and Daniel, smiling as the camera flashed. Then Amelia turned to me, her voice low but firm. "Actually, could we get a couple without Mom? For the classy shots?" My smile froze. The photographer hesitated, looking between us. Daniel shifted uncomfortably. But Amelia's bridesmaids were all ready, moving to fill the space beside her, their dresses a perfect palette of blush and cream. I stepped aside, slowly, deliberately. The rest of the afternoon blurred. I found my seat at table 14, tucked near a wall where the music was muffled, and the only view of the dance floor was blocked by a towering arrangement of lilies. I sipped my water, pushed the food around my plate, and tried to ignore the laughter from the head table. When the toasts began, I waited for my turn. The best man told a story about college pranks. The maid of honor gave a heartfelt speech about friendship. Then Amelia took the microphone. "I just want to thank everyone who made this day possible," she began, her smile sweeping the room. "Especially Daniel's parents, who have been so supportive and welcoming. And of course, all my friends who've helped every step of the way." Her eyes passed over me without stopping. No mention, not a word. Something in me hardened. I sat very still as she handed the mic back to the DJ. My pulse was steady, but my decision was made. If she wasn't going to acknowledge me here, in front of everyone, then I'd do it myself. And I wouldn't just be acknowledged. I'd be heard. The DJ was about to move on, music already queuing up, when I stood from my seat at table 14. The scrape of my chair against the polished floor made a few heads turn. "Excuse me?" I said, my voice carrying more than I expected. "May I have the microphone for a moment?" The DJ hesitated, glancing toward Amelia. She looked startled, caught between a polite smile and something sharper. But before she could answer, I was already walking toward the center of the room. Guests shifted in their seats, curious. I took the microphone, feeling its weight in my hands. I could hear my own heartbeat in my ears. "First," I began, "I want to congratulate my daughter and her new husband. Amelia, Daniel, marriage is a journey that will test you, shape you, and, if you're lucky, teach you what it means to truly love someone." I paused. People leaned in, expecting something warm, perhaps a funny story. "I wasn't planning on speaking for long," I continued, "but sitting here today, I realized I couldn't let this moment pass without saying something from the heart. Because there's a truth I've been holding on to, and I think it's time it came into the light." A ripple went through the crowd. I kept my eyes on Amelia. Her smile was fixed now, tight around the edges. When Amelia was 8 years old, her father passed away. It was just her and me from that day forward. I worked 2 jobs, days at the library, nights cleaning offices, so she could have everything she needed. I sold my wedding ring to help pay for her college tuition. I skipped dinners so she wouldn't have to skip her school trips. Every choice I made was with her future in mind. The room was silent. Even the clink of glasses had stopped. I never once thought of it as a sacrifice. She was my daughter, my blood, and I believed blood was enough to bind us, no matter what. My voice stayed steady, but I felt the heat behind my eyes. In the last year, I've been reminded, over and over, that love without respect is just a word. That blood isn't enough if it's only flowing one way. I have been told, in small ways and in bigger ones, that I am not classy enough, not polished enough, that I might embarrass the family. Amelia's eyes flickered. She shifted in her seat, Daniel's hand on her arm. I let my gaze sweep the room. "So, I want you all to know something. Today, I came here with a gift in mind, a gift I'd been planning for years. I was going to add my daughter to my will, my home, my savings, everything I'd built. I thought it would be my way of ensuring her future, the way I always have." A murmur rose among the guests. But today, sitting at the far corner table, being asked to step out of photos, and hearing the thanks given to everyone except the person who has stood by her since the day she took her first breath, I realized something. I took a breath, my voice lowering but somehow carrying even farther. Gifts are for people who value you, and respect, real respect, cannot be begged for or bargained. It's earned. I held her gaze for a beat longer. "So, I won't be adding her name to my will. I'll be leaving what I have to those who've shown me kindness, loyalty, and love without condition. And that decision, Amelia, is my wedding gift to you." The silence was deafening. Somewhere near the back, someone's fork hit their plate. I handed the microphone back to the DJ, turned, and began walking toward the exit. My steps were slow, measured, not the march of someone in anger, but the stride of someone who had just put down a weight they'd been carrying for far too long. Behind me, I heard a voice, Amelia's, call, "Mum, wait." But I didn't turn around. Not this time. The air outside the venue felt cooler than it had an hour earlier, or maybe it was just the rush of blood in my ears finally settling. The evening light cast long shadows across the gravel path as I walked to my car. My heels clicked with each step, steady and deliberate. I didn't cry. I thought I might. But there was no ache in my throat, no sting behind my eyes. What I felt was empty, but in a way that made me lighter, like setting down a heavy box you'd been carrying for miles without realizing how much it was hurting you. When I reached my car, I sat for a moment, hands on the steering wheel, letting the distant hum of the music from the reception fade. Somewhere inside, my daughter was explaining herself, maybe apologizing to a circle of guests, maybe fuming. but I didn't care to know which. The drive home was quiet. I rolled down the window, letting the evening breeze sweep through. For the first time in months, maybe years, I felt like I wasn't clinging to the idea of what a mother-daughter relationship should be. I was simply accepting what it was. When I got home, I made myself tea and sat at the kitchen table. The will was still on my desk, the envelope exactly where I'd left it. I slid it toward me, opened it, and read every line. Amelia's name was there, typed neatly, followed by the list of everything I'd intended to leave her. I picked up my pen and, without hesitation, drew a line through her name. In its place, I wrote two others. My niece Claire, who had visited me every week without fail, and the Carter Family Scholarship Fund, which I'd helped establish at the local community college years ago. I signed the amendment and dated it. My lawyer would finalize it on Monday. That night, I slept without tossing or turning. The next morning, I woke to 6 missed calls from Amelia, 2 voicemails, and a text. "We need to talk. You can't just humiliate me like that in front of everyone." I stared at the screen for a long moment before typing back, "Respect is not inherited. It's earned, and you gave yours away." I didn't wait for a reply. Over the next few days, the calls slowed, then stopped. Word of the wedding speech must have spread, because I started getting unexpected visits and calls from relatives I hadn't heard from in years. Some offering support, others fishing for gossip. I told them all the same thing. It was time she understood the cost of her choices. Marianne came over one afternoon bringing a lemon pie. We sat on the porch, the swing creaking under us, and she said, "You looked 10 years younger when you walked out of there. I swear I could see the weight lift off you." I smiled. It wasn't about revenge, Marianne. It was about not letting her rewrite who I am in the eyes of everyone else, or in my own. A week later, I mailed Claire a letter explaining the changes in my will. I didn't want her to find out from paperwork after I was gone. She called me crying, promising she'd honor my trust. Life settled back into its rhythm. I read in the mornings, tended to my garden in the afternoons, and in the evenings, I'd sit with my tea and watch the sun dip low over the horizon. There were moments I thought of Amelia, not with bitterness, but with a kind of distant sadness. I still loved her. That hadn't changed. But love, I'd learned, doesn't require you to stand in a place where you're not valued. Some nights, I'd open the locket around my neck, the one with Mark's picture inside, and I'd tell him quietly, "I did what you would have done. I protected what we built." And in those moments, I knew with absolute certainty this had been the right choice, not because it hurt her, but because it finally healed me.